Hello, everybody, and welcome to another in a series of the SkySwitch webinars. I'm Andy Abramson with SkySwitch, and it's going to be a very fun and educational webinar today, as today's webinar is all about communications, compliance, and controls, how HIPAA compliance applies to SkySwitch resellers, and we're so happy to have our friends from Compliancy Group with us today. Compliancy Group has been working with SkySwitch for quite a while. I've gotten to know Paul and the rest of the team there over the last year and a half and really find them to be an incredible group to work with. Paul Redding is going to join us. He's the VP Partner of Engagement and Cybersecurity at the Compliancy Group. And Compliancy Group is all about protecting the privacy and integrity of any business, especially your business's confidential information, which is so important to getting more and more important every month. I haven't had coffee yet this morning. Sorry, guys. But what it really applies to and why it's such a big opportunity for you is the whole area of HIPAA and doctor-patient confidentiality. And that's so important for you because doctors are small businesses usually. And your bread and butter for our resellers are often small business customers. So we're going to talk all about that. Compliancy Group is here to help meet the challenge for you as a SkySwitch reseller, but more importantly, to help your customers have that compliance certification that they so need so they don't get dinged by any regulatory body or you don't get hammered by a regulatory body because you failed to be compliant. We're going to talk about a lot today. We're going to talk about why we work with Compliancy Group at SkySwitch, what your opportunities are within healthcare as an MSP, as a VAR, as a WISP, as an interconnect, what the compliance requirements are for voice providers, why you want to offer HIPAA compliance to your clients at a time where it becomes more and more important, and how to successfully sell HIPAA compliance to them. You're also going to learn about business growth. We're going to explore the world of compliance and controls. And then, as usual, we're going to have a live Q&A where we welcome you to ask your questions. You can put them in the Q&A. Please don't put them in the chat. Put them in the Q&A section. And that way, if I see one while Paul's talking about something and the question you ask is relevant to what he's discussing, I'm going to try and slip it right in and get Paul to answer it while it's fresh in your mind and fresh in his mind and fresh in everybody else's mind. So with this, let me introduce Paul Redding, the VP Partner of Engagement and Cybersecurity over at Compliancy Group. Paul, take it away.
Andy, thank you so much for that introduction, sir. And again, thank you guys very much for the opportunity to speak with you and your resellers today. Very excited to be here. Again, I am Paul Redding with Compliancy Group. Just as a way of background, I come out of the managed service provider space. I actually owned an MSP in Memphis for about 12, 13 years. We were exclusively focused in healthcare and Department of Defense manufacturing. So compliance and the security around it are very near and dear to my heart, somewhere that I've spent most of my career. If for those of you that are not familiar with the Compliancy Group itself, we are a 15+ year player in the healthcare space. On the healthcare direct side, we're something of an industry standard. Our seal of compliance, which you see there, that says the HIPAA seal of compliance. This is what we give you when you complete our process. Partners that carry this seal are everybody from, SkySwitch themselves out to some of your largest EHRs, think like EMDs. And our seal is endorsed by some of the largest medical associations in the country. In fact, more than 40 of them. So for example, if you work very heavily in eye care, the American Optometric and almost every state optometric organization endorses that seal as the preferred way of illustrating your HIPAA compliance to the world. Something really important to understand about Compliancy Group and that seal of compliance is that when we give this to you, it means we've taken you through a process to validate and verify from an organizational, security, and soup to nuts level that you as a company are fully HIPAA compliant, we issue that seal, and no one that's ever gotten that seal has ever failed an audit. That's not because, unfortunately, bad things don't happen to good people. They do, and some of those good people have been our clients. But if we've issued that seal, we're going to defend you under audit. We've been 100% successful over our entire 15-year history. We've never, ever had a client fail a HIPAA audit that has that seal, which I think is probably one of the reasons that SkySwitch has partnered with us, right, Andy?
Well, the whole reason why we love working with you is all the things you do. Why don't you give some examples of why we're working with you and why it's important for resellers to think seriously about working with Compliancy Group?
Well, I'll tell you the first reason I think SkySwitch works with us is because they're so partner focused. SkySwitch is so focused on support and the security and the protection of their resellers that, they brought Compliancy Group in to shore up their own compliance program, be able to illustrate it and help those partners out there differentiate both themselves and their services, right? So it protects them from fines and from bad things happening, but it also pulls a SkySwitch partner out of what is a crowded room and allows you to sell higher value HIPAA compliant solutions. And just as importantly, a compliant organization has to build an internal culture of compliance, right? Everybody in that company knows what their job is. Privacy, security, and compliance are in the front of their mind. You look different. You stand out. So the reseller for SkySwitch that's HIPAA compliant not only is out there selling a higher value solution, but it's very obvious to the market as a whole. You look so different. That seal of compliance, the way that you talk, the way that you take my EPHI, first in your mind, it stands out. It doesn't look like everybody else. And I think that's very important in today's, somewhat crowded market to understand. If I'm a doctor or a medical professional at any level and I'm shopping for unified communications, the minute I see that seal of compliance on a SkySwitch reseller's website, my business card, the minute I see that, I know certain things have taken place. I understand that the technology itself has been set to a standard that allows for EPHI. That's the medical data that we're so concerned about protecting here. It's going to make sure it's protected in transit and at rest. And it means that this platform is really designed for me as a medical organization, right? It's been built around my business. It looks different. Now, I want to clarify something, and Andy, I think this is a place where you and I can agree. SkySwitch is HIPAA compliant. You're willing to sign your business associates, you're willing to sign agreements with them and say, hey, we're gonna do the right thing on our end, but that doesn't really make the reseller themselves HIPAA compliant out of the box, right?
That's correct. And I think it's important that you explain that in detail and also explain that PHI stands for personal health information. And the whole idea here is that information is protected health information. It's and as a result, it can't be shared without permission of the patient. You've all heard, you've probably seen on television, patient doctor confidentiality, or the whole idea of patient confidentiality. That's what HIPAA encapsulates. That's really what it's all about, so that your medical information doesn't go somewhere and gets used against you.
Right. And it's important to understand that the way that the law works, there's a chain of custody, right? So if I'm a doctor out there and I'm working with a SkySwitch reseller, the person that I shared that EPHI with through my phone system, through the support that they're offering me, that's the reseller. That's not SkySwitch. The reseller is looking to SkySwitch to be compliant, and the client is looking to the reseller, right? But understand, if you do this, it's not purely punitive, right? Like, the whole point in this webinar is to not come in here and go, guys, somebody is going to come get you if you don't do this immediately, and that's all there is to it. No, by being HIPAA compliant, there's a massive opportunity for the VAR, for the MSP, for any technology service provider out there. Understand that if you are compliant, you now have the ability to work with what is one of the largest sectors in the US economy. In fact, guys, before COVID, okay, pre-COVID, healthcare was already almost 30% of the US economy. Now, I think it's very interesting to point out here, while there's a lot of different compliance standards, NIST, PCI, FERPA, and they apply to different industries, healthcare, while it's a massive segment of our economy, is very different than some of these other big sectors. So I'm going to pick on manufacturing and finance, right? Manufacturing and finance are huge sections of the economy made up of a couple of very, very, very large businesses, think like Boeing or Lockheed Martin, that trickle down some revenue to small businesses supporting them. It's a pyramid, right? Healthcare is an inverted pyramid. Healthcare, the vast majority of it is actually small to mid-sized businesses. Over 5 million small to mid-sized privately held organizations make up the vast majority of the healthcare market. And this is why there's such a focus, both for malicious actors, the hackers that are out there trying to steal data, and for the federal government through regulatory enforcement. Guys, the federal government just shelled out like $6 trillion plus in bailout money into the US economy. And the only way that a government has to recoup income is through what? Taxes and regulatory enforcement. If you understand that there's a segment of the market that's completely under attack all the time, and they're failing every single day at protecting themselves and ultimately, complying with the law, then the government puts a target on them and knows I can come get that money from you. And just as importantly, I know that 2020 has been something of a crazy ride, and nobody knows what the future of the economy really holds. I'll tell you this, and the federal government knows it as well. It doesn't matter who's in office, how the economy is doing. Healthcare just continues to grow, folks. In fact, during the last major recession, healthcare made up the vast majority of job growth in our country for that entire decade. Not only that, wages increase in healthcare, revenue increase in healthcare. In the end, it had overtaken many other segments in society, and it's gonna happen again. The most recent, financial strain is actually caused by a healthcare crisis, which means more and more money gets pumped into a sector that again is under assault from all angles. If you're an IT security provider, a VAR, an MSP, and you're out there looking for somebody that needs you, there's nowhere farther to look than healthcare. You just got to look right here. Understand that every expert in the world knows between a combination of remote workforce expansion, telehealth platforms, and inadequately trained staff, this sector is ripe for exploit. The reason
Now,
for yes, sir.
Paul,
Go ahead.
question. Does the reseller need to be an expert in healthcare to sell HIPAA compliance, or does Compliancy Group give them the tools to become more proficient at moving it on to their customers' platform?
That's a great question, Andy. The reality is that, and I'll pick on myself, right? I was an MSP. I was not in any way a HIPAA compliance expert. I'm in cybersecurity. It's a different job. It's a different skill set. What Compliancy Group allows security and service providers, MSPs, to do is focus on what you do well, knowing that you have a partner like us that picks up all the stuff that's not your either responsibility or, let's say, your number one skill set. So the overall concepts of compliance that we're going to talk about today, we're going to divide responsibility. You as a security provider are going to get to do what you've always done, protect the flag, right? We are going to pick up all this administrative privacy, the legal piece, and we're going to guide you through the technical journey that you're on. So the goal is to actually simplify compliance so that you can simply focus on your business.
Great answer.
It's a great question. And I'll tell you, I want to pause and tell everybody out there, because I made a pretty big statement, right? Healthcare is 26, almost 30% of the US economy. Guys, I'm not trying to convince you that doctors make up 30% of the US economy, okay? If you have a single healthcare client and you can conceivably, and the law literally says conceivably, interact with their EPHI at any level, you're what's called a business associate. See, covered entities are what you immediately think of. Doctors, the actual insurance providers, healthcare clearinghouses, right? Those are your covered entities, traditional healthcare. But Compliancy Group, SkySwitch, your MSP. We're all in healthcare because our clients are in healthcare, and it expands beyond just us. Lawyers, call centers are a great opportunity for you to work with. Your email hosting services, uh, development shops, all of them are business associates, and they're all caught up in this world too. See, again, if I'm looking at finance or healthcare and I'm a hacker, which one am I going to go after? Well, I mean, the one that's 6 million and 5 million small businesses. I can rob like 16 liquor stores before I can get away with robbing one bank, right? And that's why this sector is so assaulted. Now, in case you don't think stuff is real and you think that the risk is not real for you, understand, and everybody will get a copy of this, you can look it up, but this is what we call the HIPAA wall of shame, folks. This is a searchable database of the good people that bad things happen to. If you ever have a breach, if you ever have a violation or a fine, your business name, your name as the owner, what happened to you, what they did about it, everything there is going to go on this wall of shame, and it can never, ever come down. Okay. This is a database forever, a who's who of who you might not want to work with. And it's not just massive organizations. If you look at the dates here, guys, this is all in the last, 30, 45 days from today. We update this thing constantly. The wall of shame is constantly changing, and real people are getting hurt. For example, I want to point out a couple of fines that are on the wall of shame recently that and explain to everybody out there ways that you can fall down in HIPAA. Okay, so for example, the first one, and Andy, I think this is a place you have a lot of expertise. I know I've talked to you about it. Those business associates that we're talking about, let's say SkySwitch, for example, working with you, there's a contract called a business associate agreement that you have to have in place between, and Andy touched on this, between first, the doctor and the first service provider, and then on up the chain as long as that EPHI moves. Just not having one of those documents on file, just for one vendor, is a $31,000 fine before you go through your audit process. So this first organization here, they didn't even get into their audits. Nobody's busting them for what caused the actual breach. They were fined $31,000 because they didn't have a contract with an MSP, literally. Late breach notifications. I don't know how familiar everybody out there is with this, but understand what is a trouble ticket to you can be a meaningful breach for your client. And you have up to 60 days to get full notification out to everybody affected by that breach. It's a law, and you have to notify OCR. By not having that solution in place and not knowing how to handle it, another clinic was fined almost $500,000. Again, not for the breach itself, but because after the breach, which hurts bad enough, they didn't let everybody know in time.
This is kind of like cybersecurity. When you have a breach of your, private personal information, you have to notify all of the people who may have been impacted. That's why a lot of times your data is secure. You haven't been breached, but they still send you the letter, and that's because they want to cover themselves from any future damage claim.
Absolutely. The word conceivably gets used a lot in compliance law, and conceivably is pretty broad and sweeping, right? So if you think you don't have to report, you have to be able to prove that that person's data wasn't collected, which is very difficult to do. Another thing that I think is an interesting find, and one that we included on here, is literally an Alaska nonprofit, and everybody that works with nonprofits will know most of them don't have a ton of money. So in healthcare, they're actually given a lot of leniency on the fines. They're smaller because they're nonprofits. These guys were fined $150,000 because they didn't update their policies and procedures that year. It didn't reflect what they were doing as an organization. It means that the breach was fine. They weren't actually in trouble for what caused them to be hacked, but when they looked at their paperwork, they hadn't done it correctly that year. I'll speed up. Unencrypted devices. This is literally one lost laptop, $2.7 million. The laptop's not why you got fined, but that organization didn't do a risk assessment that year, and they didn't update their policies and procedures to say that the laptop had to be encrypted. So it's not the breach. It's what you as an organization were doing every single time. Patient testimonials is one that blew my mind when I saw it. A physical therapist talked to a patient, they gave them a quote, and they posted it on their website and put it up. They didn't actually ask the patient if they could do that. Little tiny fine, it's just a blurb, 2 sentences, $25,000 for those 2 sentences, $12,500 a sentence. Who can afford this stuff? And then a press release is the same thing, right? So at $2.4 million, this was a press release that included somebody's information. Now, I imagine the marketing team got fired, but understand, if you look at this stuff, guys, and you're out there as an IT service provider, can anyone tell me where the hack was that caused the fine? Notice, the hack is not what causes the fine. It's your lack of compliance. That's the problem that people don't understand. And for the record, the average fine in HIPAA is $1.5 million over the entire 15-year history. And by the way, in the middle of a pandemic, 2020 was a record year for HIPAA fines, record year for HIPAA violations, and it's just going to increase next year. This is why you guys want to get in here and deliver a solution to your clients that resolves their HIPAA compliance needs, okay? Because compliance is bigger than the IT. If you look at the fines that I just listed, the IT might have caused the breach, but the fine is caused by a violation of compliance. You see, HIPAA compliance is not a technical problem. It's not an IT problem. HIPAA compliance is a business problem. The solution provider that goes out and sells something larger than IT, delivers a business solution. What are you? You're a bigger piece of my business as your customer. You make a bigger impact to me than just some tech tools and technology that I don't understand. You're delivering a piece that I can't live without. And not only will I pay you for it, it makes a stickier, deeper relationship between you and me. You become, in many ways, that trusted advisor that so many of us in the service industry have aspired to be, right? By delivering a bigger solution than IT, you've stepped in and done something really for me. But let's get back to your own needs and what you guys are looking for. Understand that delivering that compliance solution, whether it's for a 1-person mental health professional, a 50-user medical practice, or Baptist Memorial Hospital systems, the technological requirements are the same for everyone. The law doesn't come in and tell you that you have to put in a specific software. It gives you these semi-vague kind of technical requirements like access control, endpoint protection, monitoring and auditing, which every tech guy in the room goes, God, that gets really big really fast, right? Encryption, both in transit and at rest, backup disaster recovery, the network security layer. These things are required everywhere. And I'm just curious, did everybody notice I just described your stack? The law literally calls out, if you are an MSP, a security service provider, the law calls out and mandates the things that you are trying to get into your client environments. It's very difficult to explain to somebody what a Black Point or a Scout cybersecurity does, but it's monitoring, auditing, and detection. It's incident response. Those things are called out specifically in the law, and therefore, as a reseller, I've given you a way, and Compliancy Group is a validator behind you, to not try to con your client, convince your client that they got to have it, to simply explain it's the law. It's something that's got to be put in place to protect them. It gives it a lot more teeth and a lot more leverage when you're out there quoting. But I do want to clarify, taking your stack, putting it in, knocking out all the security stuff did not make your client compliant any more than when SkySwitch took care of all of their technical security side and all of their administrative side, it made you as a reseller compliant. No, it takes those technological controls that we talked about, but then there's, and people call it the soft side of HIPAA compliance. Let me tell you, the soft side is what hits the hardest. When we went through those fines, when we talked about the people that bad things happen to, if you noticed, what they're being fined for and what they're being penalized for is the soft side. It starts with assessments. Every MSP service provider out there knows that you want to go out and sell a risk assessment, right? You need to do a risk assessment for your client. Again, this is something that in the general private sector is a good idea. In HIPAA world, it is legally mandated under the law, and it goes beyond just your IT audits. You're going to do IT risk assessments, but there's a whole series of other audits that have to be done around the organization. Beyond the IT, the answers to all those other audits, when it asks a question and you say no, the thing you've got to do to fix it is implement policies and procedures and employee training. It's how the organization functions that ultimately determines whether or not you are HIPAA compliant. So I can have all the technical safeguards in the world in place, but if I didn't do all 6 major audits, make sure that my policies and procedures actually reflect what I'm doing in this organization, and then turn around and train my staff, teach my people, these are your policies and procedures. This is what's required for you to do your job. And I need you to both understand it and legally attest to follow it under law. Until I have done those things, my organization is not HIPAA compliant. And I want to emphasize to everyone out there, no technology is compliant. The organization using, building, or implementing the technology is HIPAA compliant, right? So that's why it takes more than just the IT. See, there's a language barrier out there. A lot of IT service providers and MSPs, when you say HIPAA compliance, they immediately go back to that stack and they go, well, yeah, I got that. I'm going to put in all that security tools that we talked about it, and I'm going to protect you. The problem is, while security is critically important in chasing compliance, security is not actually compliance. There's a difference in the two. Security is risk management. I say it's shades of gray. And what I mean by that is it's defined by your individual risk profile. So I'll take 2 companies, Nike and Lockheed Martin. Okay. While they're both multi-billion-dollar companies, Nike's security profile and Lockheed Martin's profile are wildly different. You have enough security when you run out of money, but since Nike makes tennis shoes and Lockheed makes like missiles and nuclear weapons, I'm pretty sure Lockheed better run out of money for security after Nike, right? That's what it is. It's shades of gray, and it's protecting against risk. Compliance, on the other hand, it's binary. It's a series of yes or no questions. If you're supposed to say yes and you say no, you can be what? Fined, penalized, given legal sanctions. Compliance is protection for an organization or an individual from violation of the law. It's technologically vague, but it mandates security. And in order for your client to be safe, you have to have both of these. That's why a SkySwitch and many of their resellers are working with Compliancy Group right now, because you guys get all the security in place, and then you don't have to become an expert in all that soft side gray area that's so confusing about compliance. Compliancy Group comes in, takes that off your shoulders, lets you do what you do, and simplifies what is a really messy law to understand. I'm
Paul,
not,
isn't this a
go ahead.
situation of tangible versus intangible? The security's tangible. You know what you have to do. You're able to see it. You're able to do it, and you're able to implement it, turn it on, and it runs. On the other hand, compliance is an intangible. It's elusive at times. One mistake can be a human error, and it can lead to those fines that you were talking about. It's also a lot of common sense. You were showing a bunch of examples of like the news release. We've always told people when you put out a news release, did you get this person's permission to quote them or to use the statement that they wrote in? The fact that someone sends you a letter praising Compliancy Group for great service doesn't give Compliancy Group the right to put that on their website without permission. That's why so many times when you do online surveys these days, it says, are you granting us permission to put this on the website? I always say no, but I also tell them they can contact me for more information, and then maybe I'll give them permission to put something up. So a lot of this is common sense, but it's also in that area known as the intangibles. You can't put your finger on it until you do something wrong.
That's very well said, Andy. And back to that 94% failure rate in the market under HIPAA audit, that's why. That's why I'm not so cynical as to believe that all these people are running around like over 9 out of 10 are willingly negligent, willingly non-compliant. The problem is that, to your point, there's a huge vague gray area in this multi-thousand page document. So the HIPAA law, and you kind of see like a visual representation of it here, is like 1,000 pages of documentation written by lawyers to be interpreted and audited by other lawyers. It's not a technical rule. It's not a cybersecurity framework. They base it around a cybersecurity framework for part of it, but it's broken up into multiple rules. And just for the record, like I said, I won't turn this into a big HIPAA lesson, but to show you where IT security fits, it's down here on the left. IT security is literally only 1/3 of the actual security rule itself. For every rule and sub rule you see here, there's an audit set that has to be done on an annual basis. And then for this rule over here on the right, the only one I'm going to call out, I think that it's good to remember this rule because this is why all of you out there care. So we've got the privacy, security, and the omnibus rule. The omnibus rule is why you care. I'll give you a way to remember it. I call it the on the bus rule. Because your client is on this HIPAA bus, you got to get your butt on the bus with them too. That's why SkySwitch is in this. It's why Compliancy Group is in this. The omnibus rule is the thing that brought you into it. And you better believe it, there's an audit for that too. In fact, there's a total of 6 audits that have to be done if you're a medical provider and 5 if you're a business associate. So again, if you're out there and you've been working in the healthcare space for a little while, kind of touching on helping Alina with your side of it, you're only doing 2 of these 6 audits. The question becomes, both for you as an organization and for your client, what about those others? If you can't tell me how you or your client did on your high-tech Subtitle D privacy self-audit this year, which I can barely even say, then you're not HIPAA compliant. What you are, and it's a frightening place to try to ride. I used to hear this term a lot. Where you're trying to live, if you're not doing all of it, is what's called HIPAA light. I had a client use this term with me years ago. I said, what do you do for your HIPAA program? They say, I kind of do HIPAA light. I said, what does that mean? So, well, I got an IT guy, and he put in security tools and a firewall, so I'm pretty sure I'm compliant. Guys, first of all, as the MSP, the VAR, the reseller out there, I know nobody is trying to just throw in antivirus and a firewall and call their environment secure. But just by doing that and maybe like downloading a template offline or doing your IT risk assessment, you call it HIPAA light. There's no HIPAA light. HIPAA light is just a great way to fail an audit. I akin this to like Algebra 2. Right? So in Algebra 2, if your answer is right and the work is wrong, you fail. I know because I flunked that class in high school. It's the only one I failed in high school the first time because I couldn't show my work. That's how compliance works. You see, for every answer, there's a series of work. There's some things that have to be done. And Andy, to your point earlier, documentation around it that's all got to be in place in order to say that you're doing HIPAA right, that you are actually HIPAA compliant. And back to the need for the MSP and the reseller to go in there and be the one providing this, understand, to do it right, it's going to require more than just antivirus and firewall, guys. We are going to lean on you and push on your client to implement that high-end security. Those things like Blackpoint out there that, you don't want to have to explain how it works, but your client's got to have it. Remember, to do HIPAA right, all that stuff gets in place. So that's the reason that you want to do this. Now, let's be honest. What I've talked about today is not a traditional MSP talk track exactly, right? I haven't come in and handed you a security tool or a typical widget and said, implement, deploy. What I've said is, you've got to talk to your client about a business problem. So how do you do that? How do you have this conversation and not be a HIPAA expert, to Andy's point, right? I'll tell you, it really comes down to 3 things. I eventually mastered this. It took me a while to learn it. And I've learned for some other MSPs ways to really expand on it. But it all boils down to 3 things, guys. You got to focus on education. Don't worry about trying to sell it so hard. The sale will happen when they understand the need. You got to get out of the technical weeds and give them real world examples so that people know what the heck you're talking about, right? Because one of the problems in this MSP world is we're very focused on the technology and the tools. So when I say focus on education, I'll take Compliancy Group, for example, and what I'm doing today. You guys don't know what you don't know. I didn't come in and try to tell everybody here from the beginning of this, you are not HIPAA compliant. Andy did not start this yelling at everybody and freaking you out. What we said is, I want you to come in here, learn today. Let me teach you A, what it takes to become HIPAA compliant, B, why you need to be HIPAA compliant, and C, what benefit you have for this. That's no different than you talking to your customers, right? Whether it's HIPAA compliance or anything else, if you can come in and show me and teach me something I didn't understand, walk me through in a question way. I use question-based selling myself, that walk me through to where I come up with my own answers, I'm more likely to buy from you. So instead of saying, hey, look, 94% of people fail their audit. I can tell you right now, walking in the door, you're not HIPAA compliant. It's aggressive. It makes me uncomfortable. Maybe I'm going to argue with you. Instead, by asking a question and saying, so doctor, tell me about your HIPAA compliance program. How do you guys manage compliance? You're more likely to get an honest answer that I really don't know. I'm really not sure. And now I want to hear what you say back. I want you to teach me and talk to me. If you work with Compliancy Group, for example, what we will do is we'll come in and we do webinars that are specifically focused just on your client base, not talking to MSPs, but talking to dentists or doctors or any of those folks. And it's not a sales pitch. It's just like today. I want to educate you, show you your need, and show you the benefit. If you do that, I'm more likely to buy. Now, I got to get back to the rise above the tech thing, guys. I personally, when I started my MSP, thought I could grab enterprise tools and bring them to the private market and wow people with the technology. I love EDR and SOC and SIM and all these utilities, and I love what they do and why. My customer doesn't understand and they don't care. Right? When I go in and I talk to a customer about EDR, SOC, and SIM, I am pushing them into a corner and talking about stuff that they really don't understand, and they might even resent a little bit, but they're definitely not comfortable with, right? Instead, if I come in and I talk to you about your business and your reputation, I point out ways that we are the same. I used to start my sales conversation with, hey, I'm in healthcare too. Right? Because I have clients in this industry. I am in your industry. We share the similar problems. The solutions that I've built, the partner that I work with in Compliancy Group, this is all because we're in the same business. I am the service provider that's just like you. Now I'm listening. If I'm the customer, I hear you. You're talking about my business. You're talking about my reputation. You might even talk about the marketing aspects of that seal of compliance. You don't sound like just another IT guy, right? And remember, if I am uncomfortable, you beat me over the head with a bunch of acronyms that I don't understand, EDR, MDR, womp, 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 Charlie Brown's teacher, right? Bunch of nerd stuff I don't get. I'm uncomfortable and I want to get out of the conversation. The confused mind says no. By educating, staying focused on things that they can understand, like their business and their reputation, I want to hear you out. Now, this last one, this is one that I'm going to give you a very specific example to kind of talk through. It's one that I've used many, many times successfully. I believe that successful selling is about relating to people on their level, okay? Talking to people about something that they truly understand inherently and taking the solution that you're trying to present to them and showing how it's like that. Call it an analogy, if you will. I built my clients a house. You see, my clients didn't have an IT problem. That was one of the elements out there in the world that's scary and bad and can hurt them, right? They didn't have just an administrative problem. Again, one of the elements out there that they've got to deal with. They had a whole bunch of little problems that together create risk and fear and doubt for their organizations. You have one big problem. It's called HIPAA compliance. Your whole life is on the line for this. You're a doctor. You've put everything into this. You've built your business up and you don't really understand what it takes. So what I would say is, Doc, it's kind of like building you a house. There's a lot of elements out there that we need to protect you from compliance to security and across the board. We have a solution because we're in healthcare that's built specifically for healthcare and organizations like yours. It's going to take care of all of these things. It's complete, it's comprehensive, it's a house. You're going to be able to go in here, live and sleep at night and know that you're protected from bad things happening to you. And even if something bad happens, you are still protected further. The house is full and complete. Now, the reason that I use this analogy is not because as soon as I call it a house, everybody yanked out their credit card, tossed it to me across the table and said, whatever it costs, I want to buy, right? It's not the case. But the reality is my organization was about $175 to $200 per user per month for that house. Everything all in, all of your tools, all of your compliance. I want a couple $100 a user, right? When I explained everything that we've talked about today, that I'm going to come in, deliver a complete security solution backed by an expert compliance group that's going to validate everything we're doing, you want to buy from me. You want the thing I'm selling. But then when I got to 175 a user, many times I did get the response, Paul, I like everything you've said today. You don't sound like any other IT guy I've ever talked to, but 175 a user is more than I'm comfortable spending. I mean, my current guy's $100. So can we meet at like 135 and call it a day? Before, when I was working out on my own, didn't bring compliance into the picture with me, all I'm selling is all that technical nerd stuff that I'm trying to like get in the door, I would have to go, oh, yeah, that's my bronze package. Let's take this out and that out and this out and that out. And that's what you pay for, right? And I'm not ashamed to say I did that many times. But when I started building that house based on compliance, based on their business need, and that client says that to me, my answer is very different. I don't have that bronze package. I say, Doc, I'm building you a house. And while it's 175 users, maybe a little bit more than you're used to paying right now, let me explain. If I let you go in here and rip stuff out to 125 or 135 or whatever that number is, it's like I'm going to build you a house and you're going to randomly stick your hands in my bucket and take away a stack of boards and nails. How am I supposed to keep building? I mean, where do you want the hole to go, man? I'm trying to build you a house and you're randomly removing my materials. So I'll tell you what, Doc, I'll keep building if you can tell me, where's the hole go? Floor, wall, or ceiling? Better yet, what do you like better in your house? Snakes, bugs, or rain? Something's getting in. It sounds layman's, it sounds basic. It is. That's the point. They don't understand all the risk in the tech. They don't understand all the legal requirements behind it. They do know I don't want to sit on the couch with a bucket full of water, right? They get the concept. They realize what you're saying is you built a solution that by itself is complete and comprehensive. And if they tinker with it, they have to decide where they want to establish and accept risk.
Paul, it reminds me of the old axiom: a professional is expensive, an amateur costs you a fortune.
Love that. Yes, exactly. Exactly. At the end of the day, how often do you, let's stay in the analogy. I mean, how frequently are you cool with replacing the waterlogged couch, right? Eventually, you might should have just gone ahead and paid for the extra shingles. That's where we are with this, folks. If you bring in experts with us, you're the security expert, and what we can then do together is deliver what they need. A complete and total compliance solution. So I promised you in the beginning, you are not going to become a HIPAA compliance expert. What you would do working with us, the way that this whole thing lays out, you're going to do your job in the beginning. The 2 risk assessments, the 2 audits that you were required to do, the IT portion of that. We are going to assign your client, just like we would assign you when you sign up, a human being, a coach to walk your customer through the rest of this process, which means all those other audits we talked about, the stuff that you don't understand and you don't want to take on. That coach is then going to work with them to identify, hey, look, this IT gap over here gets resolved. Your MSP says that's with a firewall. Great. But the high-tech Subtitle D privacy audit requires these policies and procedures, and we're going to build that for them. Put that in place. The coach is going to make sure that it reflects what your organization actually does. I had one of the smartest people I know one time tell me a policy that you don't follow is just a list of stuff you should get fined for, right? So we're going to make sure it actually reflects what you do as an organization. And then we are going to train your employees on this. For the record, while it's a great idea, anti-phishing training and IT InfoSec training is not what's required under the HIPAA law. Your employees have to read your policies and procedures, understand them, attest to them, and train on HIPAA every single year. We're going to do that, and we're going to track it and prove that they did it. We are then going to manage that whole contract thing that Andy and I've kind of bounced back and forth with today. We're going to help you decide who's supposed to get the BAAs, who you're supposed to get them from. You're going to do your vendor due diligence completely through my program, and you're not going to have to worry about it. And every one of those contracts is going to be brought back in and logged in my system where it can all be presented. And that's the last piece of this. If there is an incident, if there is an audit, anything that happens with a breach, we are going to take care of that for you. The reason that nobody has ever failed an audit with Compliancy Group is because we don't let you respond under audit. If you have a breach, we're going to help you provide the breach response. And if you go so far as an audit, then your only response is we work with the Compliancy Group. Please accept response from them. The average response that comes out of my system is about 400 pages. It's what those lawyers that wrote this law want to see exactly the way they want to see it, in exactly the order they're looking for, with 100% of the documentation you need. That is a complete and total compliance solution. And believe it or not, guys, it requires very, very little to no intellectual heavy lifting on your part. We're the compliance experts. You're the genius that brought us into the room. Now, Andy, that's kind of wraps up my portion of this. What do you have to add to that?
Well, I think you've done a great job at really not putting fear, uncertainty, and doubt into people's minds, but explaining to them why being a subscriber to the Compliancy Group services is so important to resellers. This is all about HIPAA compliance. This is not about taxation. This is not about, how many minutes were used. This is about making sure that everything that you as a reseller need to do in order to protect yourself and in turn to protect your medically related customers who have to be HIPAA compliant remain so. This may not be a doctor's office. You may have a medical billing company, and that medical billing company deals with protected health information, patient records, payment information, insurance information. All of those details are private and are protected by HIPAA. So as a result, if you have one little tiny breach, you saw what it can cost you. And I'll go back to what I said to Paul earlier. A professional is expensive, an amateur costs you a fortune. Don't let somebody tell you, oh, you're covered. I've done this a million times. There's a reason why companies like the Compliancy Group exist. I have a friend who does ISO 9000 audit training. Same idea, just like you were talking about the coach. My friend of many years, he goes into companies who have to get their ISO 9000, 9001 certification, and he makes sure he does an audit, and then he does a checklist, and then he points out all the things that are at risk if you don't correct it. And if the companies decide they're not going to follow his advice, guess what? They normally end up having to do it all over again. So you can do it the smart, the old story, you can pay me now or pay me later. What Paul and the Compliancy Group are all about is helping you ensure that you don't have to pay a lot more later. We have a question, Paul, that comes from Glenn Hardesty. He wanted to know if you're going to cover how this specifically relates to SkySwitch's solution. I missed the first few minutes. I may have missed that piece. Need to understand how to position SkySwitch in these specific environments that require HIPAA compliance. Well, for starters, as SkySwitch is a white label company, you're positioning yourself, Glenn. You're not positioning us. You're positioning your MSP or your interconnect, whatever your business is, to your customers, and you want to be able to attest that you have a HIPAA compliant business and that everything you do meets the HIPAA compliance requirements for your business to be dealing with anything related to HIPAA or protected health information. On the other hand, your customers who need to do it, you're going to bring them Compliancy Group as well. Paul, why don't you go a little deeper on that?
Absolutely. Well, as it directly relates to SkySwitch, your point about it being white labeled, what you get to say, and legitimately so, is that your voice solution is completely, totally HIPAA compliant, right? And SkySwitch can help make sure that you've got it configured correctly. But the reality is that that's not ubiquitous in the voice world, right? So when you talk to this customer and you say, everything that we do is HIPAA compliant, from our organization, meaning we work with the Compliancy Group, we have our policies, procedures, we train, we do all that stuff, to our technology. Our voice solution, for example, is completely protected. We're allowed for EPHI and can be used for any of your sessions. What you're saying is not, and I want to be very clear about this, the technology itself is not HIPAA compliant. It's secured according to HIPAA requirements. You as an organization, as a reseller, VAR, and
Great. Paul, I want to throw a question at you because there are no other questions. Telehealth has exploded this year because of COVID. How is telehealth and video conferencing and doctors making video calls? How does what you're doing and
can you hear me? It broke up just a little bit.
Okay, let me start again. Telehealth really grew this year because of COVID-19. How does what the Compliancy Group is doing with HIPAA apply to telehealth providers? Hello? Oh, we lost Paul. It looks like Paul has an issue with his connectivity. I'm going to thank everybody for tuning in and thank Paul for giving a great presentation. Erica Vasquez has done another fabulous job at organizing today's conference call and making sure our webinar was 100% a success. We're going to take a break for a little while. It's the holiday season and we'll be back next year. But I wanted to let you all know that we want you as a SkySwitch reseller to have an incredible holiday. We'll be back in January with some more webinars. But until then, on behalf of Paul Redding and the Compliancy Group, I'm Andy Abramson. For all of us at SkySwitch, a happy, healthy, merry, and wonderful holiday season and a very, very great and festive new year. Thanks a lot.